Hello and welcome to episode 3 of my challenged books summaries videos. If you're not sure why I'm saying challenged instead of banned books, I explain that in episode 1 of this series. You can go and check that out by going to the banned book playlist that I have. In this video, I'll be talking about The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, and The Giver. I'll include the author's name up here because I've missed that on my notes. Thought I had everything ready. So first, The Handmaid's Tale. This is by Margaret Atwood. There's also a TV series about this now, I believe, on streaming video, I think. Might be available through Prime, as well as a movie from a number of years ago. I read The Handmaid's Tale as a teenager, and it had been quite a while since I read it the second time. It was nice of Dave and Olive from Book Blather to ask me to do this as a buddy read, and we also had Vin from Revenant Reads join us. I have to say, it was a very pleasant experience. It was my first time on Voxer, first time doing a buddy read. I really liked being able to hear what both Dave and Vin had to say about the story. And it's one thing that I really do miss about working in schools is the conversation about different books and characters and our thoughts. So I really enjoyed doing the buddy read about this one. This is one of the few books that I stayed up all night to read when I started it. So I began it in the afternoon. I finished it around 1:30 in the morning because instead of cheating and going to the last chapter, I just plowed on through and got to the end. And then I went through a third time, slower, to do the buddy read with Dave and Vin. And it really worked well for this particular book. As you can see, there's a number of pages that I have marked about things that stood out. And no, Noah, don't panic. This one I didn't write in. These are like literal sticky notes that I can take out. But the third read really did bring out more of what was going on in the story. Because like I say, the first time I just plowed through it to find out how it ended because I needed to know. The third time I was going through slower and really thinking about what was going on and taking the time to notice how different characters changed, different things appeared in the town, all of that. If you're not familiar with the story, there has been an accident that's resulted in a disease spreading across the country. The government has been toppled, and things are very different afterwards. Society has had a drastic change. Women suddenly discover they no longer have access to their money. For me, that really stood out now that we're into these debit cards and people using their phones for money. It's no longer cash in hand. So with the flick of a button, suddenly women had no money. And our main character discovers that when she goes to make a purchase at a store and suddenly her card doesn't work anymore. Like I say, things have changed drastically. People are divided into various groups. We have the Handmaid, which our story is about. There are the people who work in the kitchens and do the cleaning. Oddly enough, they're not allowed to go out and do the shopping. That's an activity for the handmaid, but they don't get to decide what they're buying. They're given tokens, not money, by the housekeeper and sent to go pick up the specifics at the various village stores. They're not allowed to read, so everything's picture symbols. They're not allowed to go to the village by themselves. They're accompanied by another handmaid, and they walk together to and from and then to their homes. It's a very different type of world. Although There are regular executions, and throughout the story, the handmaids walk past. The faces typically aren't shown of who's been killed, but there are identifying marks of whether they had been priests or doctors, that type of thing. Our main character had been married, she had a child. When they realized that things were drastically changing, they had decided to try and head up north. Yep, up here in Canada. Unfortunately, they didn't make it to the border. She's taken captive. We don't know what happens to the husband. We find out that her daughter was given to another family to be raised. And the job of the handmaids are to have children. They're sent into the various homes. There's a whole ritual ceremony type thing that happens on a regular basis, but they only stay in the homes for so long. The hope is they'll get pregnant, have a child, but they don't get to keep the child. It's raised by the husband and wife at the home they're placed in. So you can imagine how uncomfortable and creepy that must be, whichever role you're in. It definitely gives you pause to think what happens when the world that you knew is completely turned upside down. Unlike 1984, where the characters have forgotten what the world used to be like, it takes place a number of years after the change. In The Handmaid's Tale, it is only a matter of, I think, a year or a few years until everything shifts. So people remember what the world was like beforehand. Our character runs into a friend of hers from the time before, and they have some chats, but of course they have to be very careful. Everything's monitored, everything's watched. Personally, I can't imagine living like that, but I mean, some people do now with CCTV in every room of their house. It's everywhere on the streets, it's in the stores. It's just, there are a lot of things reading this book now compared to when I read it back in the, would have been late 1970s. The world has changed dramatically, and so was the experience of reading this book again. I'm glad that I did. But now it's as creepy as reading 1984 by George Orwell, which, by the way, I read in 1983, and the world was not quite like that back then. But like Handmaid's Tale, you start to see some of the things they were talking about already here. So if for no other reason, I suggest reading The Handmaid's Tale to get an idea of just how quickly things can change. Not that I think our world is going to be like that, but it does get you thinking about what if. And could this someday happen? It's almost like a horror story. The next book, The Outsiders, picture should be here, is by S.E. Hinton. And I read this numerous times when I worked in English classes. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the conversations in the classes. I'm not quite sure why people have an issue with it. As someone who has met individuals who lived the lifestyle of Ponyboy, his brothers, and their friends, I can definitely say this author gave a very good description of what that's like, the loyalty, the bonds to each other, and the reasons for it. In this case, Ponyboy and his two brothers find themselves having to rely on each other as their parents have died. The older brother, instead of going on to college, stays at home, takes two jobs so that he can raise his two younger brothers. There's issues between the two classes, the Socs and the Greasers. It's set in a different time period again. I personally thought it was a very interesting read. Like I say, she's described the lifestyle quite well. We see how the characters change, develop. We also see the reality of being in that type of a group with that type of lifestyle means that some individuals don't make it into their 20s. And that's the reality of things. Some individuals do eventually get a break or have people to support and help them, and they move on to other things. I think it is a very important read. I think it is suitable for teenagers, adults, and yes, I do suggest giving it a try. The final book that I'm going to cover in this video is The Giver. Picture hopefully is on this side. This is a book that I read that was available to be a novel study in the English classes I worked in. It isn't one that the teachers covered when I was working in any of the classes, but I did read it myself. When you begin reading this story, it sounds like almost the perfect world. You have peace, people have these great discussions with children, and everything is just running along tickety-boo. Everyone knows what they need to be doing, but as the story continues, you start to figure out there's something not quite right about this world. There are colors missing from the world. There's something about the stuffed toys that don't quite make sense. We don't know why. There's a celebration day of they pick who your kid is. You don't have kids. There's a lot of different things that start getting your attention. There is also, much like in the Divergent series by Veronica Roth, if you've read it, a day where all the kids gather together. In this case, it's to move on to something different in their culture, whether it's the type of hair that they have, being chosen for what kind of jobs they're going to be doing. In Divergent, it's a one-time age thing, and you pick which of the 5 groups you're going to be in. In The Giver, each year, each group gets to do something different. So it starts with the quite young ones, and they get to have bikes and toys and hairstyles, and then, like I say, being selected for what they're going to do. The character in our story finds out that he hasn't been selected for any of the typical jobs they would be assigned to. He is very unique, much like Beatrice in Divergent. But in this case, he's selected to be the one who will take over from the giver. And it's through their conversations that we start to realize why it is this society seems as unemotional as it does, why colors are missing from things, and the cost of what that takes on the giver so that all these other people can have their ideal, perfect little world. Again, it's a story to make you think. It's one that I do suggest reading if you haven't already. I'm not giving any spoilers away. Like I say, there are clues throughout the book about how this is all gonna potentially turn out, but you don't really know right up until the end of how this all goes and what happens to this ideal world and what the cost of all that was. Those are the 3 books for this video. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of them. Did you enjoy them? Would you recommend them? Until next time, take good care.